When I typed the seed into the new launcher, I didn't expect much. It was an old scrap of paper, yellowed and creased, with numbers smudged from my teenage handwriting. I thought the world was lost forever, buried somewhere between old hard drives and forgotten summer afternoons. But then, the terrain began to load. Chunk by chunk, my past appeared in jagged squares. It wasn't smooth or polished like modern worlds. It was raw, blocky, the sky stretching wide and simple. The title at the top still said Beta 1.7.3. My heart jumped. This was the version before hunger bars, before villages, before the world felt crowded with lore. It was just you, the blocks, and endless possibilities. I spawned on the same gravel shore where I had first punched trees over a decade ago. The music started, C418's faint piano, like a memory sneaking through headphones. The strangest part? My old builds were still here. The crooked dirt hut with the torch outside. The cobblestone tower I swore was epic when I was 13. And when I opened the chest inside, there was a sign, written long ago. Future me, don't forget. I stared at it, chills racing down my arms. I placed the sign back exactly where I'd left it, like returning a book to the quietest shelf in a tiny library. Beta light bled in through the single glass pane I'd smelted from beach sand years ago. The colors were flatter than I remembered, dandelions bright like crayons, roses a deep pixel red you can't find anymore. No sprint key. My steps were patient. The world felt like it breathed slower back then, like it wanted you to notice the hill instead of vault over it. Outside, the gravel shore clicked beneath my boots. I followed the shoreline toward the cobblestone tower that used to be my lighthouse, though it never lit anything except my imagination. At its base, I found a half-finished minecart track, the kind you boosted with slanted carts and hopes. A sign waited there too. To the cave that always rained. I smiled despite myself. We didn't know about biomes properly. We just named places like fairy tales. I pushed a cart and hopped in. It jolted forward, then stalled, then obeyed the old booster and rattled along, iron against memory. The tracks slid into a cut through the hill where torches looked like pinned stars. Drips echoed even though Beta caves didn't drip. It was just my head filling in details. The tunnel opened into a familiar cavern, coal freckles in the stone, iron tucked like old coins. My staircase still spiraled down the left wall, a clumsy helix of cobble and dirt. At the landing, another chest waited, lid facing the ladder like a dog waiting by the door. Inside, 2 cooked pork chops from pigs that still looked vaguely square and very pink, a stack of 38 torches, and a flint and steel with half its life gone. Beneath the chest, a pressure plate I'd never noticed depressed with a dull click. A note block in the wall chimed G, then E, then G again. The same 3 notes I used as a home ping. It hit me hard. I wasn't the first player to return to this world. I was the same player crossing my own footsteps, hearing a breadcrumb melody I'd left for a future I couldn't imagine. The cave that always rained got its name because the ceiling thinned under a lake. In certain chunks the sky flickered, and raindrops phased through the stone like the world forgot which version it was. I reached the spot and somehow, it still drizzled. Not real water, just the sound of rain bleeding through from the surface, the old ambient loop that felt like loneliness and comfort at once. I set a furnace and smelted the iron while the rain that wasn't pinged the cave. Beta's smelting was unhurried. Each ingot arrived like a small ceremony. I crafted shears I didn't need just to feel the recipe again. Then I placed a pair of torches in that asymmetric way I used to, high on the left, low on the right. That was my code for safe path home. Deeper in, my old strip mine began, a neat 2x1 tunnel that believed diamonds lived at moral depth. The left wall carried signs every 30 blocks. Keep going. Almost. Trust. A later sign had different handwriting. Taller. You'll laugh when you find it. I didn't laugh when I found it. I just stood there and let the old torchlight do its gentle math across the floor. A rectangular frame sat in a niche, 11 obsidian blocks and 1 empty corner I'd never filled because I believed. Unfinished builds have a soul. The portal hummed even without fire. Maybe that was me remembering the sound before I heard it. Above the frame, another sign. Light this when you forgive yourself? Forgive what? The beta screen never told you. The game didn't keep a journal of your choices. It just remembered shapes and placements and odd rituals, like leaving one obsidian block out of stubborn poetry. I held the flint and steel. For a second the cave rained harder, or my chest did. I clicked. Purple swallowed the silence. A first-try portal in a rickety world is like a miracle that pretends it isn't. Before stepping through, I did what 13 me always did. I put everything precious in a chest. 1 iron pick. The shears. Half the torches. I took only a stone pick, 7 cobble, 3 pork chops, and the sign that said, Trust. The Nether in beta isn't a destination, it's a mood. The portal coughed me into a red room where glowstone hung like fossilized lightning. No fortresses. No wither skeletons. Just endless caverns, ghasts that screamed like broken radios, and pig men who minded their own gold business. My portal had spawned on a ledge overlooking a lava ocean, because of course it had. I placed the Trust sign facing the portal and carved a staircase down using cobble slabs, old habits from when every block felt expensive. Halfway, I found an old breadcrumb, a single piece of gravel in a perfect square hole. That was my trick for marking. I came from above. Same player. Same tricks. Different hands. At the bottom, I gathered glowstone dust like catching stars in a jar and listened. Not to the ghasts. To the silence between their cries. There, faint as a secret, a 3-note chime answered me, G-E-G. I turned. In the netherrack wall, torches in my high left, low right pattern flickered toward a tunnel I didn't remember digging. The tunnel was too neat for panic and too crooked for plans. It curled through netherrack like a thought that refused to straighten. Every dozen blocks a sign. 1 more. Almost there. You're braver than last time. I counted torch gaps, checking if my old rhythm matched this new path. It didn't. The spacing was off by 1 block each time, like a metronome set a hair wrong so you'd notice. The corridor opened into a small room whose floor I'd replaced with soul sand, back when it was only a texture that slowed you down and made you pay attention. In the center, a chest sat on a single obsidian. Inside, a compass spinning uselessly, 9 glowstone dust, and a book and quill that shouldn't exist in beta. But there it was, pretending this was normal. The pages were blank except for the first line. Write the coordinates you wish you'd remembered. I didn't write anything. I just stared until the nether light flickered like it does in memory, and the compass needle trembled toward a direction compasses don't care about. Home. Back in the overworld, dusk had draped itself over the gravel beach. Beta sunsets move like honey, slow, golden, dignified. I climbed the cobble tower and placed glowstone on the roof, finally making the lighthouse a little more honest. From up there, I could see the old landmarks unroll, the sugarcane farm that never lined up, the birch I swore was my tree, the sand pit where I learned glass is just melted patience. Something new broke the horizon, flat land that looked wrong. A hard rectangle where the terrain refused to blend, bordered by a cliff that ended like a page. A chunk boundary. I remembered this world being generated across updates. It wore seams like a patched jacket. I hopped down and walked to the cliff's edge where newer stone met older grass with no apology. At the seam, a lone torch sat on the higher side, facing the void. My sign style. My placement height. But the message was carved different. Load only what you love. I tested the seam like you test a memory you're not sure you want back. I mined a block on the old side, regular stone. On the new side, coals showed instantly, as if the world wanted to bribe me. The torch on the lip flickered, not like code, like suggestion. I placed a dirt stare down into the newer chunk and felt that old vertigo when your world proves it can be many worlds that still touch. At the bottom, I found a tiny meadow with the simplest pond. No lily pads. Just blue. And beside it, a sapling planted in a perfect cross of dirt and cobble, A pattern I used when I was certain rituals worked. A sign. Plant here if you're ready. I checked my inventory. One oak sapling from my hut chest, brittle and ordinary. I planted it. Nothing happened, because of course nothing happens when you expect fireworks. Then the music found me, C418 again, chords like remembering how to breathe. The pond caught the fading sky and folded it into squares. I added a torch high left, low right, and felt the meadow accept it like a handshake. Night in Beta doesn't threaten, it persuades. Stars arrive with the quiet confidence of things that have always existed. I heard the first spider before I saw it, harmonica legs on grass, and retreated down my old tunnel until the world calmed. On the way, I passed the sign in my hut. Future me, don't forget. I added a second below it. I'm trying. Sleep was still a thing you forced with a bed, not a suggestion. I lay down and let the screen darken. No phantoms. No advancements. Just a cut to morning that felt like forgiveness. Outside, the sapling had grown 1 block taller. Impossible. But I swear the leaves looked like they'd rearranged into a heart for a single frame before becoming normal again. Breakfast was pork chop and silence on the gravel shore. I looked at the lighthouse, the seam, the meadow that had accepted my torch, and the nether portal humming in the cave that reigned. The world didn't just remember me, it had saved space for the player I might still become. I picked up my tools and decided to build something I'd never rushed, a proper path that took its time. I started the path the way I used to, slapdash, honest, and a little too narrow. Gravel where the shore allowed, planks where marshy sand tried to swallow steps, cobble over dips that stubbornly flooded when I looked away. I placed torches in my high left, low right rhythm and listened to the soft pop as each one took. Paths in Beta aren't just lines, they're promises you make to your future self. I'll come back this way. I'll notice this view again. Half a stack in, I detoured to the sugarcane farm, trimming with the same sleepy precision as a haircut you've given 100 times. I left bottom stalks like the old guides taught, because we all believed in rituals that saved time in an era when time felt slower anyway. On the hill above, I found a single block of mossy cobble poking through dirt like a knuckle. That made my hands itch. Dungeons. I marked the spot with 4 torches and a sign. Open carefully. Tools repaired, pork chops pocketed, pockets emptied. Old dungeon etiquette washed over me like a bedtime story where the scary part knows to stop at the hallway. Under the moss, the dirt fell away in a neat rectangle as if the world had pre-agreed to be explored. A zombie spawner sat in the center, bars like a birdcage where the bird refused to learn the song. I knocked torches onto the walls until everything pretended to be safe. The chest loot was charmingly earnest. A bucket, bread that healed without hunger, cocoa beans that once meant rare. A saddleback when pigs were the only vehicles sillier than minecarts. I paused at the music discs, green and black, C418 waiting on tiny vinyl squares for a jukebox I never built. I took cat, left, 13, because some superstitions stay glued even when the code never cared. On my way up, I sealed the spawner behind glass, my old museum trick, so I could watch the wheel turn and remember that danger could be both curated and kind. Back on the path, I placed a fence post and perched the saddle on it like modern art. A future joke for a visitor who'd never come. Still, the world chuckled. The pond winked. I kept building. The path wanted to go somewhere truer than coordinates. It threaded past the birch I claimed years ago, skirted the chunk seam that divided then and later, and drifted toward a hill I never properly named. From the crest, I could see my lighthouse glowstone admit its job at last, and beyond that, the faint purple cough of the cave portal. I added a waypoint pillar, 3 cobble, 1 torch sign. Look left for home. Look right for what's next. Down the far slope, gravel crunched into a beach I'd barely remembered, a place where I'd once tried to farm pumpkins without understanding stems. The old tilled lines still scored the sand, ghost rows that the tide never bothered to erase. I retilled 1 square with a wooden hoe, just to feel the small tap of it, then stopped. Some patterns deserve to remain as echoes. When the sun folded into the water, I stamped the path with 2 extra torches and made a little shelter the way we all did in the first nights. Dirt roof, doorless doorway, bed in a corner. I slept without ceremony and woke to fog that smelled like rectangles. Morning carried a rumor: animals had wandered back. Beta passive mobs are stubborn. They spawn with a map's birth and then stick around like neighbors who own their street. A pig stood at the path's bend, judging my curves. I fed it nothing, promised it everything, then moved on. Near the meadow, the sapling had become a proper tree, fat trunk, leaves squared into that old generous canopy. I climbed into it with ladders, carving a platform like a child cutting a fort out of time. Up there, the world felt wide but uncomplicated. I placed the jukebox I'd finally crafted and slid in. Cat. Piano notes drifted like dandelion seeds that decided to hum. Between songs, I caught another sound, a soft, 3-note chime from underground. G-E-G. I froze, listening through grass and dirt. The chime answered twice, as if checking whether I was still the type of player who followed breadcrumbs. I pocketed the disc, left the box humming the last chord, and dug where the leaves whispered yes. 2 blocks down, my shovel hit wood. A mineshaft couldn't be here. Beta hadn't blessed these worlds with rails that spawned like tangled thoughts. I cleared more dirt and revealed a single oak plank, then another, then a sign in the dirt itself. Impossible, but plain as text. Lay rail to hear the rest. I don't argue with good dares. Back at the hut, I raided the chest where I'd hoarded iron before hoarding was a skill. I smelted, crafted, and returned with rails like stitches. I laid a skinny line from the tree's roots to the little hole, placed a cart, and pushed. It rolled, clicked a pressure plate I hadn't noticed, and somewhere below, a note block choir answered, G-E-G then B, an invitation higher than nostalgia but not smug about it. I widened the hole and found a cramped chamber. No mineshaft, just my blocky handwriting on signs arranged like chapter headings. If you're reading this, you kept building the slow things. Good. A chest waited with exactly 1 item, a map with the center torn off. Maps in Beta are half-blind optimism. You chart the world by carrying paper like a lantern, and the lantern only remembers what you show it. This map had edges inked with the old grid, but the middle was missing, a square of absence, carefully cut. On the backside scrawl, "The part 1 couldn't draw yet." I climbed to the treehouse and pinned the map beside the jukebox. The lake, the hut, the lighthouse, outlined like childhood photos you don't mind friends seeing. That empty center stared back, stubborn. I set my compass next to it, watched the needle ignore the absence politely, and decided the only honest response was path. So I extended the gravel ribbon straight into nowhere, torch spacing in my off-by-1 cadence on purpose, leaning into the imperfection that made the world feel human. Skeleton bones clacked under a ledge. I remembered how much braver I'd become when I learned to place blocks between me and worry. 2 cobble, 1 step forward, breathe. The path survived. I did too. The empty square on the map waited without pressure. That felt like permission. At midday I hit plains that looked like they'd been ironed. No flowers. Just green, weed-colored patches, and a tiny pond that a poet would call deliberate. In the open, the wind noise from old ambience files made its modest theater. I stopped to build a stone bench because it felt polite. On its back I wrote, "For catching up with the player you were." A shadow crawled across the ground, a cloud, yes, but for a second it moved with too much intention. I looked up. Beta clouds are flat and slow and honest. This one wore the same shape as the chunk-seamed cliff. Maybe my brain was stitching metaphors where code didn't. I laughed, which helped. The path met a ravine I'd never seen, a clean tear with coal freckles and a small waterfall that thought it was important. I bridged it with slabs, counting to calm myself. At the far lip, I planted a sign. Walk, don't run. Sprint didn't exist then, but the advice still felt right. Across the ravine, the grass thickened into a hill whose summit promised a view of the missing square. On the hill, everything paused. The world does that sometimes when your screen fills with enough sky to make the chunks think twice. Then the horizon pulled itself together, and I saw an ocean that hadn't been there in my memory. A big one, flat as held breath. The map's missing center probably lived out there, refusing to render because I'd never been brave or bored enough to sail. I crafted a boat with the old recipe, 5 planks like a smile, and pushed off. Boats back then were both gentle and stubborn. They'd glide like you had earned it, and then snap like you hadn't. I kept the shoreline torch line in sight until the path glow looked like a necklace you loaned to distance. Far from land, the water texture repeated like a mantra. The sun began its slow amber descent. I remembered the panic that used to come with nightfall at sea, that special loneliness of knowing you couldn't place a bed on water, and you wouldn't anyway because rules mattered more than workarounds. I chose to trust the moon. Moonlight made a silver quilt. Out in that hush, I heard it again, the breadcrumb melody, faint through waves, G-E-G-B, then a soft sea like a grin you only see at the end of a joke. I angled the boat toward the sound and nearly missed the tiniest marker, a single torch on a single sand block rising 1 meter above the ocean, a pixel lighthouse for people who still believe in lowercase miracles. Beside the torch, a sign stuck into the sand. Anchor here if you're ready to remember for real. I circled, half laughing at how theatrical I'd become to impress myself, I guess. I placed a ladder on the sand post, climbed up, and saw it, a faint, darker patch beneath the surface. Glass. I dove. Under a thin skin of water, a dome of glass blocks made a little library on the ocean floor. Inside, a chest waited with space for exactly 1 item. A pressure plate beside it connected to a line of redstone dust that trailed into a note block cluster. The sign read, "Deposit what you thought you needed to keep." I opened my inventory and tried to be honest. The compass? It didn't help in a world that pointed only to first beds and old habits. The glowstone dust? Pretty, but I had more at home. The music disc? That felt like stealing from the treehouse's mood. I hovered over the flint and steel, remembering the portal sign. Light this when you forgive yourself? I put the flint and steel in the chest. The plate clicked. Water muffled the note blocks as they chimed the full pattern, G-E-G-B-C, then silence that felt like a door opening where a wall had always pretended to be. A hidden piston coughed. In the far corner of the glass dome, a block retracted to reveal a tiny tunnel leading up. I swam through and surfaced inside a pocket cave behind my lighthouse, where I'd never looked because I'd convinced myself I already knew this coastline. On the wall, one last sign waited in that taller handwriting I'd grown into. Good. Now build the long bridge home, the one that takes as long as it needs. I stood on the gravel shore, moonlight on glowstone, and felt the map's missing square shift inside me, not on paper. I picked up my tools, turned toward the horizon, and started measuring distance in torches. The bridge began as an apology to every shortcut I'd ever taken. I set oak logs like teeth into the shoreline, capped them with slabs, and tied each span to the next with fences that clicked into place like steady breathing. No sprinting, no elytra, no fireworks, just a meter-by-meter ceremony of choosing to arrive the slow way. Every 20 blocks I planted a torch high left, low right, and the sea answered by laying its square ripples quietly beneath me. Halfway to the sand marker, I built little pullouts, 2 plank alcoves where you could stand and be undecided without falling in. On one I placed a crafting table, on another a chest with bread and spare rails labeled, "For anyone." There was no anyone but me, but the label mattered. Old worlds teach generosity as a building style. By dusk the bridge touched the torch on sand pillar. I wrapped it with fence like a ribbon and mounted a sign. You remembered. The ocean inhaled night. I walked the new way home slowly, counting fence posts instead of minutes, and when the lighthouse came into view, I didn't wave. I nodded, like you do to a friend who always knew you'd show up. Morning, I took the map from the treehouse and traced my finger across its stubborn hole. The paper didn't change. Beta Magic never cared for grand gestures, but the empty square felt less accusatory. I tacked a second sheet beside it and titled it Bridge, even though nothing would autofill. Names are their own kind of rendering. Down on the shore, I added details my younger self always skipped. Lamp posts with trapdoors that hooded the light. Half-slab curbs that made the path feel finished without feeling final. A bench at the portal mouth for people who wanted to hear Nether hum without committing to the heat. I sat there and listened. Under the portal's steady wash, the breadcrumb motif played, G-E-G-B-C, very faint, like a memory deciding to be background music instead of a quest. I crafted signs, too many, and started hanging them where they made me smile. Place block, breathe. Turn left for patience. Jump only if delighted. The world didn't roll its eyes. It just held the words until they felt like they'd always been there. I visited the Dungeon Museum to collect the music disc I'd left behind. 13. The one I avoided. In the soft torchlight it looked less like a superstition and more like a dare to be less precious. I carried both discs to the treehouse and made a second jukebox like a twin heartbeat. Cat first, sun on birch bark, easy afternoons. Then, 13, echoes and gaps, the sound of a room checking if you're okay. I let it play until the fear in it turned into texture. When the record ended, the sapling tree shed one leaf, just one, onto the ladder. I left it there like a note. From the platform I could see the long bridge cutting clean across the water, not dividing anything, connecting. Beyond it, clouds trailed like long thoughts. I realized I hadn't been underground since the portal. Old me measured progress in diamond pickaxes. New me was measuring in benches and signs. That felt like growth that didn't need a stat. Still, I missed the hush of bedrock. I grabbed spare torches and a stack of bread and told the lighthouse out loud. Hold my place. Back in the cave that always rained. I followed my torch code deeper than nostalgia had bothered to preserve. At a bend where I used to turn around, I kept going, 1 torch, 2 torches, breathe. The stone changed mood. Lava's orange sermon glowed from a side chamber. I capped it carefully with cobble like tucking a blanket around a story that runs hot. At Y level whatever. I didn't count. Beta didn't flaunt numbers. I opened into a room that looked suspiciously like intention. 4 smooth stone pillars, a floor of alternating gravel and cobble, and in the middle, a single obsidian block with a sign. Start over, but keep what you learned. I smiled at my own dramatic flair and placed the crafting table on the obsidian because symbolism works better when it can also craft ladders. I mined a careful branch. Coal first, old friend. Iron second, still exciting. Then, like the world decided to wink properly at last, diamonds, 4 of them, shock blue. I held them in my hand until the texture resolved into gratitude. I made no tools. I put them in a chest and labeled it. Not yet. The breadcrumb notes found me even here, muted by stone. G-E-G-B-C. I followed, widening the tunnel just enough that future me wouldn't bonk their head. The sound led not to treasure but to a cul-de-sac with a glass panel set into the wall. My museum trick reflected back at me. On the other side of the glass, a tiny diorama, dirt hut, torch outside, a paper sign reading, Future me, don't forget. It was my spawn shore rebuilt in miniature underground, a reminder you could carry a beginning with you without dragging its limitations. I placed a lever next to the glass and did not flick it. Some exhibits do their job because the barrier exists. Instead, I added a plaque. Seen is enough. The notes resolved into silence that felt like a satisfied guide. On the walk back, I broke my own rule and crafted a single diamond shovel, the silliest luxury from the old days. I used it to tidy the staircase because sometimes the point of treasure is to make ordinary movement kinder. At the cave mouth, rain that wasn't drizzled again, and for once it sounded exactly like applause. Evening roughed the sky into mauve. I climbed the lighthouse and lit 4 corners with glowstone, not to conquer darkness but to outline it. Across the water, the bridge pinned night to the horizon like a careful seam. I carried the torn center map up the last ladder and taped it beside a 3rd empty sheet labeled After. The paper didn't change. I did. On the roof, I placed one last sign, taller handwriting steady now. Load only what you love, and love more of what you load. Below it, the world breathed in chunky squares: birch, path, bench, portal, treehouse, bridge. I realized the breadcrumb melody had stopped not because the quest was over, but because it had taught me its rhythm and trusted me to hum it without prompting. I went downstairs, stood before the first sign in the hut, and finally added a third line beneath. "Future me, don't forget." And, "I'm trying," I wrote. "I remember." Then I opened the chest labeled, "Not yet," took one diamond, and placed it in an item frame over the door. Not as a trophy. As a light. Sleep cut to morning. The map center remained empty in the best way, an invitation with my name on it. I stepped outside, touched the fence post saddle like a doorknob, and chose the slow path toward whatever still needed building. I packed for a small expedition the way old worlds teach you. Too many torches, not enough tools, bred over bravado. The bridge drew a straight line across the morning, its fence posts counting breaths I didn't rush. At the sand pillar, I added a bell, just a lever and a note block tuned to C, so arriving sounded like a smile. Then I followed the ocean's edge where beaches turned to cliffs in a single block's stubbornness. Around a bend, the shoreline coughed up a ruin I never remembered placing, 3 stone pillars and a chest sunk halfway into sand. Inside, 4 rails, 1 powered rail, a redstone torch, and a sign that said, "Build a shortcut that isn't fast." I laughed out loud. Beta rails had always been a compromise between patience and play. I laid the 5-piece line from pillar to pillar, silly and scenic, and wrote it exactly 6 seconds. It ended where a bench waited with another sign. "See? Arriving can still be a toy." I left the cart on the track like a punctuation mark and watched the sea stack its repeating squares. Somewhere, the world saved. I heard it, the soft click I used to ignore. Back home, I finally indulged an old plan, a slow rail around the bay. No boosters, just gravity agreeing to be kind. I traced the curve with slabs and posts, laying track like stitching a hymn. At each quarter turn, I planted saplings and signs with tiny invitations. "Wave here. Listen here. Do nothing here." When the loop closed, I crafted 3 carts and labeled them. "Me, also M.E." and "Anyone." I nudged me forward and hopped in. The ride was quiet enough that the note block bell on the sand pillar drifted across water like a neighbor's wind chime. I passed the lighthouse and glimpsed my treehouse ladder through leaves, a stripe of intention. At the cave mouth, Netherhum fell into step beside the rail like a dog walking alongside a bicycle. The loop returned me to the start, having changed nothing and everything. On the platform I added a pressure plate that dinged the bell every time a cart finished. Not to announce achievement, just to say, "You came back." The empty square on the map still waited upstairs, patient as a harbor. Evening poured gold into the long bridge rails. I climbed the treehouse and let Cat play once, then slid in 13, without flinching. The echo was less haunted now, more like a room acknowledging its corners. I penned a new sign on the platform railing. "Some days the quest is just to notice." The wind, or the old ambience pretending to be wind, agreed. I took the torn center map down and carried it to the gravel shore. There, on my very first block of spawn, I pressed the paper to my chest, ridiculous, theatrical, and told it sincerely, "You don't owe me coordinates." I tucked it into a chest with spare bread and wrote on the lid, "For future M.E., or someone like them." Stars bargained the sky into squares. I walked the path one more time. Bench, lamp posts, portal breath, dungeon window, saddle on fence, modern art, and set a final torch at the bridgehead. High left, low right. The old rhythm that promised I'd return. I stood long enough to feel the world's hush become mutual. Morning came like a soft reset. I harvested sugarcane, replanted 2, baked bread, and mended nothing that wasn't asking. In the cave that always rained, I visited the diamond chest and left the shovel there with a note. "Thank you for making stairs, Kinder." At the ocean dome, I placed a second glass block where the piston had opened, leaving a small, deliberate scar. Museums need both labels and seams. On the lighthouse roof I wrote one last message, letters tall and steady. "This world remembers the player who chose slow." Below it, I added a small arrow pointing toward the bridge, and beneath that, a smaller line only I would read. "Keep going when you're ready, not when you're dared." Then I did the most beta-era thing I could think of. I walked inside the dirt hut, faced the chest by the bed, and clicked Save and Quit to title. No fireworks. No credits. Just the old menu waiting, music breathing in like tide. The world didn't close, it kept a light on. The map's empty center stayed empty in the best, bravest way, an invitation set to the rhythm I now knew by heart. When I come back, I'll bring more torches and the same patience, and the path will meet me exactly where we left off. I didn't mean to load the world again that same afternoon, but the title screen music felt like a hand on my shoulder. When the chunks blinked awake, they did so politely, as if they'd been napping, not waiting. I walked to the bridge and noticed the tiny thing I'd missed. On one fence post, a single item frame faced the sea, empty and expectant. I placed a torch inside it, a small picture of a promise to keep this span lit even on days I felt dim. Past the sandbell, I followed the coastline until the grass changed shade the way old palettes sometimes do, one tick colder, like memory passing under a cloud. There, tucked in a cove, sat a boat I hadn't crafted. Oak scuffed, afloat but leashed to a fence with string. A sign on the shore read, "Borrow yourself back." The handwriting was halfway between boy and grown-up, mine, when I didn't realize years had their own coordinates. I untied the string, climbed in, and let the bay glide me to the mouth where the ocean learned to be wide. No sprinting. No goal. The wake drew pixel zigzags that looked suspiciously like a signature. I didn't try to read it. I let the water finish the sentence. Clouds tiled overhead like gentle reminders. I drifted toward a scatter of sandbars that formed the clumsiest archipelago, a handful of commas between thoughts. On the largest bar, 3 sugarcane stalks stood in a line, too neat for accident. I harvested the middle one and replanted it sideways, making a crooked L. A gull's sound, or my speakers hissing their vintage, stitched itself into the wind. Under shallow water a glimmer caught, glass again. I dove and found a single porthole sunk in sand with a sign behind it reading, "Look up." I surfaced. The clouds had broken into 2 lanes, leaving a long, bright corridor pointing home. Someone, me, had been teaching me how to trust the sky. Back in the boat, I followed that luminous lane until the bell at the sand pillar chimed from distance. The note carried through the air clean as a memory that's finally done apologizing. I anchored, climbed the ladder, and added 1 more plank to the bridge, not because it needed it but because the day did. I renamed the item frame torch in my head. Good enough. When I returned to shore, the nether hummed like a neighbor practicing scales, comforting if you decide it is. I ducked inside the cave that always rained and sat on the bench I'd placed near the portal. There's a quiet that lives between purple swirls and torch crackle, the kind that reminds you building is mostly breathing with your hands occupied. I almost lit. 13. Thought better, and listened to actual silence instead. A soft footstep behind me, just one. Beta mobs don't sneak, but nostalgia does. I turned to find the zombie spawner museum glinting through glass down the corridor, slow and dependable. A single zombie rotated within, arms offering nothing, teeth committed to theater. I smiled at the wheel's gentle stubbornness and tapped the glass with my knuckle like you do at aquariums before remembering the signs that say not to. On my way back up, water pattered through the ceiling in its not quite way. I stopped beneath the thinnest patch and placed 1 glass block to catch the suggestion of rain. The droplet texture sat there, paused mid-story. It looked like punctuation waiting for a clause. I left it. Up at the hut, I opened a for anyone chest on the platform and found something new, paper. 1 sheet, folded twice, no recipe marks. When I opened it, there wasn't a map, just text. "Write a rule you'll follow only here." I leaned on the doorframe, thought longer than crafting ever takes, then wrote, "I will never measure joy with coordinates." I slipped the paper beneath the bread so the rule would feed me by accident. I crafted a sign for the world and mounted it at the path's first bend. "If you get lost, be lost on purpose for 3 torches." I walked it immediately. 1 torch, 2, 3, then giggled at the silly relief of a completed instruction. The gravel underfoot approved. Evening glowed. I climbed to the treehouse and switched discs, Cat, for golden hour 13, for the first stars. The ladder creaked in that way wood does when a sound file remembers it. I added a second railing to the platform because future me deserves easier balance. A single leaf ticked my shoulder like a friend tapping. Don't go yet. I didn't. Night pulled its blanket carefully. I decided to patrol the long bridge, not for danger but for reassurance. Every torch threw its warm coin of light, every fence post kept its quiet oath. Halfway, I placed a flower pot on a fence with a dandelion aimed at the moon. Completely impractical. Completely perfect. At the sand bell, I tuned the note block down a semitone, B instead of C, just to make a rival sound new tomorrow. Small changes are how old worlds keep their pulse. I carved a tiny alcove into the bridge's side span and tucked a chest inside with one boat, one loaf of bread, and one sign that read, "For brave mornings." I left the lid open like a smile. When I turned back, the lighthouse square glowed at the horizon like a pixel star that chose to come closer. I counted posts home. At the last one, the item frame torch still burned. I named it again, out loud this time. Good enough. The sea answered with a single, soft splash that might have been code and might have been agreement. Dawn arrived with the confidence of routines that never brag. I harvested sugarcane, replanted with the crooked L, and checked the dungeon museum's glass for cracks. None. In the cave, the diamond chest still held the shovel and my note. I added a second line. And thank you for making sand look like sugar. I don't know why, but it felt right. On the lighthouse roof I pinned a fresh sign under the others. When you leave, leave the light on for the next version of you. I looked over the bridge, the benches, the rails that refused to hurry, the treehouse that made music out of patience, and the scene where old terrain shook hands with newer code. The breadcrumb melody didn't play. I didn't need it. I could hum it now without sound. At the hut's chest, I crafted one last copy of the "Borrow Yourself Back" boat and placed it on the gravel just beyond the door, nose toward the water. Then, because this world's magic is consent-based, I clicked Save and Quit to Title. The menu breathed. The music held me up. Somewhere inside those chunks, the item frame torch kept burning, proof that sometimes the smallest picture is the truest map. If I come back this evening, or in 3 years, the bridge will still ask only what it always asked. Step, torch, breathe, notice, repeat. Evening arrived with that beta hush that makes every torch feel deliberate. I loaded in once more, only to tidy, no quests, just courtesies. I walked the path and straightened a fence that leaned like a thought mid-sentence. I topped off the lamp posts, listened to the portal breathe, and set one bread in every, for anyone, chest because hospitality should not depend on visitors. At the sand pillar, I tuned the bell back to C and let it ring once, a small ribbon tied around the day. Up the ladder, the treehouse held its green cathedral light. I played cat halfway, then lifted the needle before the last chord, saving a little music for whomever I'll be next. I wrote a final sign on the railing, letters tall and calm. You made a good place to come back to. The leaf that always taps my shoulder did, and I tapped it back, grateful for the joke we share. On the lighthouse roof, I faced the bridge and raised my crosshair until sea and sky met on a single pixel. I placed one last torch in the item frame there, another tiny portrait of promise, and watched its glow settle like a steady breath. Then I walked to the hut, looked at the "Borrow Yourself Back" boat nose toward water, and didn't take it. Leaving something ready is its own kind of going. I stood inside the doorway and let my eyes memorize the room, chest, bed, sign, the gentle draft of a world that remembers kindly. No speeches. Just the old menu waiting behind the curtain. I pressed Save and Quit to Title, and the music rose, patient as tide. This is the ending I wanted, the light left on, the path unhurried, the bridge sure of itself, and a world that will hold my place, exactly where the next honest step begins.